a girl will come and go. You reach for love, but life won't let you know that in the end you'll still be loving her. But then she's gone, you're all alone. I never learned to give myself. I've been a fool, but right now I need someone else. Well, just like boy blue eyes, I blow my horn for you. Just leave me home, baby. I should have known. It takes a fool to learn that love don't love nobody. It takes a fool to learn that love don't love no one. It takes a fool. Sometimes you gotta suffer, make your bed hard, God sleep there. Well, it takes a fool. Oh, yes, it does. That love don't love no one, no one. Sign of pain is on my face. Well, a heartbeat stopped, but I won't take the blame. No. I gave her all the love I had within. My love was strong. Something I went wrong. No. Yes, sir. Love. Yes, it does, girl. If love don't love no one, stop to think about it. Well, when you're down and out, shout about it, tell the world. Gotta be more careful of myself. Oh, baby, took me a long time to learn. Well, I was a fool, you were a fool. Now we got love, now we need a husband. Oh, baby, oh, baby, oh, baby, I love you. What you say? Can we just talk for a minute? You know, like I've always said, I'm not much of a rapper, but the truth I've learned from the time I was a child. You see, I know from experience that, baby, you can't color a thought. You sure can't touch an emotion. Love, true love is to the heart, to the soul, much the heart. I just got to explain to you how I feel Because you see, I've been a fool, but now I love you, and I've learned, baby, I've learned. Well. There's been many who wanted to know. Oh, you have to learn about it. Now you know I gotta tell them. Oh, baby. Takes a fool to learn. Yes, it does. Baby, I need and I want you to learn. And Lord have mercy on me. I'm gonna love you. I'm gonna need you so good time loving you, say. Chapter 3. Scott and Lacey. Despite their heightened suspicions, the Modesto police had little to go on during the first few days of the investigation. But one thing was clear. They needed to know more about Scott and Lacey's background. And through countless interviews with friends and family and analysis by the California Department of Justice, investigators began to stitch together a victimology report that would provide a look into the lives of Scott and Lacey Peterson. Many aspects of this report have never before been disclosed. 30 years old at the time his wife vanished, Scott Peterson was born in San Diego's Sharp Hospital on October 24th, 1972. He was the only child of Lee and Jackie Peterson, who had married the previous year. Both of Scott's parents had children from previous relationships. And when Scott was born, his father, Lee, already had 2 sons and a daughter from his first marriage to Mary Kamansky. Mark, Joe, and Susan lived with their mother in San Diego, but visited with their dad on weekends. Jackie Peterson had 3 children from previous relationships, but she had given up 2 of them, Ann Bird and Don Chapman, for adoption soon after their birth, and Scott didn't learn about them until he was an adult. Their fathers' identities remain unknown. One source close to the family told me that Jackie reportedly considered giving up her 3rd child, John, as she had done with the previous 2 children. And when her doctor advised against it, however, Jackie raised John as a single mother, and Lee adopted John after he married Jackie. Oh, bitch. John was 6 years old when Scott was born. At the time, Lee worked for a trucking company and Jackie had a small dress boutique. Before Scott's arrival, the family was somewhat estranged. However, the new baby became a focal point for their love and attention and was said to have reunited the fractured family, a phrase that would be used many times in Scott's trial. Scott's half-siblings, John and Susan, would later testify about those early years. They were both thrilled to have a little brother. He was carried around so much that family members joked about being afraid that he might not learn how to walk. Scott's childhood nickname, Scooter, captured his upbeat charm perfectly. Always smiling, always quiet and well-behaved, Scott apparently could do no wrong. John could think of only one incident where the boy displayed a temper. At age 4, after a light spanking by his father, Scott left the room. A moment later, he came back and punched his father in the stomach. That was the only memorable disturbance in Scott's gentle demeanor until Christmas Eve, 2002.
Hey, Cherie, welcome. And welcome to all of you who are spending some time with me listening to me read this book. But isn't that interesting? It is documented that the only time he got angry was when he punched his father in the stomach when he was 4. Other than that, no signs that he had a violent streak in him. None of this, right? It's amazing to when you really sit down and think about it. You're 8 months pregnant. You have so many plans and visions for the future with this baby and your family, and you're laying down sleeping in bed next to your husband, and he's laying awake thinking of ways to murder you and get away with the crime, and you have no clue. I think that is one of the most saddest aspects of this entire story to me. Nobody saw this coming. But let me get back. When the fair-haired boy turned 4, his family moved to Scripps Ranch, a neighborly middle-class suburb in northeast San Diego. Scott's father began a shipping and packing business nearby, and his young son would often accompany him on deliveries. Witness after witness described their close father-son relationship. Together, they enjoyed fishing and pheasant hunting on the weekends. And from the age of 5, Scott went along with his father to the local driving range to learn golf. He practiced with a special sawed off driver his father made for him. Lee had saved a homemade club in the basement of the family's home as a memento of those days. By age 7, Scott joined the Peterson clan on golf outings at a local country club. Yet he really made it to the 18th hole, opting instead to take his small fishing pole to a river nearby. Lee described Scott as a happy, shiny baby who rarely cried. His own childhood hadn't been as bright as the one he gave his children. Lee's grandmother had immigrated to the United States from Lithuania, settling in Minnesota, where the family lived without running water. Really? White people live like that? Just as Scott accompanied his father on deliveries, Lee had followed his mother on her housekeeping jobs. As a young man, he joined his father on his rounds repairing typewriters. Lee eventually joined the business. Lee wanted his family to enjoy a better lifestyle, and for years he had struggled financially to make it happen. The family finally turned the corner when they moved to Rancho Santa Fe. And when Scott was 10, the family headed to Poway, an inland city of about 50,000, where he attended Painted Rock Middle School. He went on to the University of San Diego High School, a Catholic preparatory school set high above the city overlooking the Pacific Ocean. While there, Scott honed his passion for golf. When he got his driver's license at 16, his parents rewarded him with a used Pugo sedan. Police learned that Scott had at least 2 high school girlfriends. The first was Stephanie Smith, who began dating Scott when he was a senior and she was in the 10th grade. And when the police interviewed Stephanie, she described how Scott had lavished her with gifts and flowers. He picked up the tab on all of their dates and even presented her with a special ring for Valentine's Day. The two had been dating for nearly 4 months when Stephanie heard rumors about a classmate named Dawn Hood. Friends were saying that Dawn had been driving Scott's new car and holding hands with the young man. And when Stephanie confronted him about the rumors, however, she found his response hard to believe. Dawn and he had swapped cars, he said, so she could try out his new wheels. When pressed, Scott vehemently denied there was anything going on with Dawn. The two were just friends. Stephanie asked about the hand holding. I hold hands with lots of my friends, he responded. That was the last straw, Stephanie told the police. She asked Scott to return the items she had given him and immediately called it quits. Not long after, Scott began seeing Dawn Hood exclusively. The police also located Dawn, who confirmed that she and Scott had dated for about 8 months, beginning in the spring of 1990. They were health freaks, she said, and refrained from alcohol and drugs. She and Stephanie both described Scott as a gentleman. Dawn told investigators that she performed community service for one of her high school classes and that Scott frequently accompanied her to a facility for children with disabilities. Scott also did volunteer work at the homeless shelter as part of a school course. Dawn and Scott broke up in the fall of 1990 when Scott moved to Arizona to attend college. Dawn remembered Scott as a loner. Her family was friendly with Scott while they were dating, and he sometimes stayed with her parents, even when Dawn wasn't there. Dawn had never noticed any violent or strange behavior during the entire time she knew him, and she couldn't imagine that Scott had anything to do with his wife's disappearance. Scott spent one semester at Arizona State University, but he told police that he'd grown disillusioned with the school after deciding he didn't like the golf coach. The facts are probably quite different. One of his teammates was the now famous golfer Phil Mickelson. When reporters asked him about his relationship with Scott, he couldn't really remember him because they were never in the same league. Phil was a rising star. Scott was not. It is far more likely that Scott retreated to Cuesta Junior College in San Luis Obispo when he realized that a PGA career wasn't in his future. Perched above the Pacific Ocean, halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco, San Luis Obispo welcomes thousands of tourists every year. Scenic Hearst Castle, the palace-like estate of publishing magnate William Randolph Hearst, is located nearby. Scott attended the junior college for about 18 months, made the dean's list, and played on the school's golf team. He paid for school by working. According to his mother, he never asked his parents for financial assistance. He surprised them both when he announced that he was moving out of their house to room with two golfing teammates. Lee Peterson told a local reporter that his son and his friend surfaced the flat roof of their new home with artificial grass. From there, they would hit golf balls into a neighboring cow pasture. According to friends, Scott dated while attending school there, but he was never seriously involved with anyone. They said he liked things his own way. In 1994, Scott transferred again, this time to California Polytechnic State University, a four-year college in San Luis Obispo. There he earned a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture. Scott's friends described him as laid back, focused, and someone who rarely displayed emotion. Y'all taking notes? Watch the individual who does not display any emotion. While he was at Cal Poly, Scott cut back his studies, taking just 2 courses each quarter while working at a golf club and waiting tables downtown at the Pacific Cafe. There, he met a young waitress named Michelle, and after they'd been dating for about 18 months, Michelle told police, Scott started talking about getting married. And when he became jealous and overbearing, she broke off the relationship, but only after a fight. Scott did not want to take no for an answer, Michelle recalled. He would hold all his emotions in for a long time and then have an emotional breakdown. Scott cried on a number of occasions, begging her for another chance. Even after they split, Scott would come to Michelle's house, eager to woo her back, trying to rekindle their sexual relationship. Still, it was only a few weeks after Scott and Michelle split up in 1995 that he began dating Lacey Rocha. Lacey was also attending Cal Poly. One of her friends was employed at the Pacific Cafe, and Lacey would occasionally come in to visit. Scott, always charming and well-mannered, caught her attention, and she asked her friend about him. Scott, in turn, had noticed the petite, curvy former cheerleader with the engaging smile. Lacey asked her friend to give Scott her phone number. And when handed the slip, Scott assumed his coworker was playing a trick and tossed the paper in the trash. When he realized it wasn't a joke, he retrieved the number. And from the moment she wrote the note, Lacey was confident that Scott would call her. Indeed, she already told her mother she'd met the man she wanted to marry, that she'd fallen in love with Scott on sight. Wow. Sharon asked if she'd gone out with him yet. Lacey said no, but predicted that they'd go out together soon. This was entirely in character for Lacey. A confident young woman, she could also be headstrong and was used to getting her way. Both her mother and her sister Amy said the same thing. If Lacey put her mind to something, look out. Before long, Scott did ask her out on a deep sea fishing trip he mentioned to the police. Lacey became seasick, however, and the excursion ended sooner than planned. Still, the attraction between Scott and Lacey was strong, and the two continued dating. Lacey told her mother that she'd found her lifelong partner. So sad. Their first date was out on a boat on the sea, and she got seasick. And look where he puts her after he murders her. If there's one person on this earth that I could be left in a room with for like 10 minutes with a baseball bat, it would be this nigga here, Scott Peterson. Several weeks later, Scott invited both women to the Pacific Cafe. He greeted them politely as they entered the trendy restaurant and led them to their table, where he had specifically arranged a dozen white roses at Sharon's place setting and a dozen red ones for her daughter. How charming this man is, really. Scott's parents also met Lacey soon after the two began dating. The Petersons liked the bubbly, dark-haired beauty from the start, but their other children found it surprising that Scott had picked a girl with a colorful sunflower tattooed on her left ankle. They thought it was outrageous. What Lacey didn't realize was that while all this was going on, her new boyfriend was still pleading with his ex, Michelle, to take him back. Scott brought Lacey into the Pacific Cafe during Michelle's shift to try to make her jealous and even introduce the two women. At some point, Lacey apparently caught on and became upset, but in the end, she prevailed. Michelle moved away from San Luis Obispo about 2 months after their breakup and never saw or spoke to Scott again. Lucky these women who dodged a bullet. Or however he murdered Lacey. It could have easily been one of them. By Christmas 1995, Lacey had moved into Scott's apartment. Her holiday gift to him was the auburn-haired puppy they named Mackenzie. Lacey graduated from Cal Poly the following spring with a degree in ornamental horticulture. Scott had avoided alcohol in high school while dating Dawn Hood, but with Lacey, he developed a taste for good wine. Indeed, Scott's parents told investigators that when they dined with Scott and Lacey, they insisted that the younger couple pay for their own bottles because they had such expensive taste. Yeah, really? Eggnog and rum, y'all. When I started reading about the couple's early years together, Scott's personality traits began to make sense to me. A sociopath is quite capable of morphing into the very person his companion needs. It is this ability to manipulate, ultimately for selfish reasons, that is a hallmark of this behavior disorder. Y'all, I'm going to read that again. A sociopath is quite capable of morphing into the very person his companion needs. It is this ability to manipulate ultimately for selfish reasons that this is a hallmark of this behavior disorder. Just as he had with Stephanie, the health nut, and then again with Janet Ilse, the vegetarian, Scott seemed to get through life by mirroring the needs of his companions. He quickly became, at least on the surface, the person Lacey wanted him to be. The rising young entrepreneur and suburban father who spent time remodeling the home, working in the yard, and joining her to entertain friends and neighbors. Later, with Amber Fry, Scott would go from a man who never attended church to one who professed in a letter from jail that he hoped to get out and do the work of the Lord. Well, slap me silly and call me Sally. Shortly after Scott met Lacey, he learned about his two siblings who had been given up for adoption before his birth. Don Chapman of Pennsylvania and Ann Bird of San Francisco were first reunited with each other and then with their biological mother, Jackie Peterson. As he seemingly did with every other aspect of his life, Scott took the news quite calmly and quickly developed a relationship with his additional siblings. Well, that was nice. In researching this book, I had the opportunity to sit down with Ann Bird, a bright, articulate, well spoken woman with a highly defined sense of ethics and integrity. She seemed concerned that she might know something important to this case, and out of a need to tell the truth, as she put it, she spoke out in detail for the first time over dinner at a California restaurant. Anne came into the Peterson family in 1996 when a half brother, Don Chapman, contacted her to ask whether she wanted to meet their bio- biological mother. After conducting a search on his own behalf, Don located Jackie Peterson and sent her a certified letter saying that he was her son. Jackie reportedly opened the letter in front of her family and then freaked out because no one else, including Lee, had ever heard about Don and Ann. Ann was hesitant, but eventually green-lighted Jackie to contact her. She first met Scott when he rang the doorbell at Jackie's home and she let him in. He could not stop staring at her all evening. She was thinner then, and the two looked very much alike, especially their eyes. Anne believes that Scott was immediately taken with her. She was worldly and well traveled, having spent 7 years in London, where she attended Oxford University. She also been to Brussels and other European cities, experiences Scott had only wished for. Her adoptive parents were wealthy, and Anne had a lot of well-to-do friends. At 22, she had landed a great job at the Golden Door Fitness Resort and Spa in Escondido, and then later at a spa in Mexico. Scott was impressed with the life Anne had lived, so much so that his sister, Susan Cordillo, grew envious of their relationship. Later, when Scott became a suspect, she carefully monitored everything Anne would say as though she was concerned that Anne might slip up and mention something that would help the police. Over time, Anne learned a great deal about Jackie and her background, but the stories her biological mother told changed continually. She recalled several different versions of Jackie's upbringing, including the one Jackie later recited at Scott's trial. In that version, Scott's mother told the court that her father had been killed on December 24th, the same date Lacey disappeared. He was struck in the head with a lead pipe for the $800 in his pocket. Jackie was just 8 years old at the time. Apparently, the murder took a toll on Jackie's mother. Some of her children were sent to live with various relatives, and Jackie was placed in an orphanage. Jackie's story did include some truths, but Anne learned from other family members that it also contained some fiction. For one thing, her father had been killed on December 23rd, not December 24th, as Jackie testified in court. There were other embellishments, but like Scott, Jackie always stayed close to the truth. There were other things about Jackie that disturbed Anne. When they first met, Scott's mother, who had lifelong lung problems and often relied on oxygen to help her with her breathing, had spent some time talking to Anne about lung transplants and how hard it was to find a donor. Anne couldn't help wondering whether she was being sized up as a potential organ donor. Of course you were, that old wicked bitch. She'd take your lung and never speak to you again. According to Anne, Jackie's husband was introduced to her as Pete. Only later, after the case broke, did Anne learn Lee Peterson had started going by Pete in the wake of some money troubles in the 1980s. At the time, Lee and Jackie were reportedly living high in Rancho Santa Fe. Jackie was driving a Rolls Royce and Lee a Ferrari. They owned an expensive home that was mortgaged to the hilt. It seemed the couple had a penchant for expensive things, whatever the cost, even if they couldn't pay for them. Eventually, Anne was told, the Petersons moved to Morro Bay, where Lee began using the name Pete. While she was already in the picture at the time of Lacey and Scott's wedding, Anne reported she wasn't invited to attend. Lacey didn't want to be upstaged on her day, Anne felt, by a new member of the family everyone would want to meet. On August 9th, 1997, Scott and Lacey were married at the Sycamore Mineral Springs Resort in San Luis Obispo, where Lacey later worked as a banquet coordinator. Nestled in the lush wooded hillsides of the Avila Valley, the luxurious resort was a popular spot for weddings, family reunions, conferences, and retreats. The grounds were densely planted with uh, brilliant tropical flowers, lush sycamores, and oak trees. Lacey's parents, Sharon and Ron, gave the couple about $7,000 for their wedding. Scott's parents, Jackie and Lee, contributed a similar amount, and Scott and Lacey covered the rest of the expenses. The ceremony was private but well attended. It was a glorious sunlit day, and Lacey was resplendent in a sleeveless wedding gown with a square-cut neck. She wore her dark hair in a sweep, adorned with an elaborate headpiece and flowing white veil. Their wedding day was a mix of the traditional and the personal. The three-tiered wedding cake was dotted with exquisite flowers, and the couple celebrated their nuptials with a champagne toast. Scott raised a glass to his new in-laws, Sharon and Ron, thanking them for their perfect daughter. Yet beneath the surface, as investigators later learned, the wedding day was less than perfect. Do tell. The resort's general manager, Roger Whiteman, told police that before the wedding he saw Scott sitting at the bar drinking and hitting on the waitress. Whiteman described Scott's behavior as inappropriate. It also seemed strange that Scott asked a new acquaintance, Mike Richardson, to be his best man, despite his supposedly close relationship with his brothers. Scott wasn't the only one behaving badly on the night of his wedding. According to the manager, Lacey's biological father, Dennis Rocha, arrived there late and was so intoxicated that he needed help putting on his pants. Then he fell and ripped the seat of his pants. Whiteman said he took the slacks, stapled them together, and helped him get dressed again. It isn't uncommon for a daughter to marry a man like her father. Scott and Dennis both drank to excess that day, and as we'll see, Scott continued to drink heavily throughout the marriage. Really? Sharon and Dennis Rocha were married for only 7 years. They had 2 children, Brent in 1971 and Lacey 4 years later. Dennis left Sharon when Lacey was a year old, and Lacey's relationship with her natural father was reportedly somewhat strained. The two had little contact, mostly on holidays and family events. Dennis's parents, Helen and Robert Rocha, owned a 325-acre ranch and dairy farm in Escalon, California. And as a girl, Lacey spent weekends living the country life. The ranch included 4 houses, a mobile home, 4 or 5 barns, and a working dairy. The couple also owned a smaller 40-acre ranch nearby. As a younger man, Dennis had worked diligently on the farm, but after years of irresponsible behavior from Dennis, the senior Roaches drew up a trust naming Lacey's brother Brent and Dennis's sister Robin as executors of the estate. The ranch was sold in 1995, and the new owner leased a small parcel to Lacey's father, where he still lives. After Lacey's biological parents split up, Ron Gransky embraced the role of father to Lacey and Brent. Gransky had a son from a previous relationship, Darrell, who lived in Oregon with his mother. And when Brent was 9, he went to live with his father in Escalon. Lacey remained in Modesto, attending Sonoma Elementary, La Loma Junior High, and Downey High School before graduating in 1993. She was extremely popular in school, joining numerous clubs and participating in sports like softball and baseball, and she was also a cheerleader for a youth program, Pop Warner Football. In high school, she held part-time jobs at a local market, a restaurant, and a doctor's office. In college, she worked at a flower shop and then a winery, and she was named Outstanding Freshman of the Year at Cal Poly. Sharon Rocha described Lacey as headstrong, noting that her birth sign was Taurus the Bull. This description would be echoed by friends and neighbors after her disappearance. One girlfriend suggested Lacey wore the pants in the family, interrupting Scott when he was speaking and directing him to take out the trash in front of company. Damn. According to another friend, Lacey even followed Scott to the bathroom, where he sometimes retreated from her chatter and just kept talking to him through the door. Ron Gransky, who described Lacey as outgoing, happy, and cheerful, conceded that her nickname was JJ for Java Jaws. Speaking later with today's Katie Couric, Gransky recalled a family trip to the caverns near Sonora. She was talking all the way up there, Ron smiled, and I said, Lacey, do you think you could be quiet for 30 seconds? Sure, she said. How long is 30 seconds? Is it 30 seconds yet? According to Gransky, Lacey was very social and found it easy to converse with people she just met. He and Lacey's mother agreed that she was extremely trusting, but not reckless or foolish. Gransky's only complaint was about Scott, who he felt did too much around the house. Ron was concerned that Sharon might expect the same from him. By December 2002, Lacey had made it clear she intended to be a stay-at-home mom. She wanted a bigger house, a new car, and more children, and no one doubted she would get it all. She was quite vivacious, but according to her sister, also bossy and eager to climb the social ladder. Lacey was a big fan of Martha Stewart, and in many ways she worked to emulate her. She baked special birthday cakes for her friends and surprised them with elegantly wrapped gifts. She was passionate about good food and hosted dinner parties with fancy fare and expensive wines. All were welcome at the Peterson soirees, as long as they followed Lacey's rules. Guests were required to dress for dinner, and tardiness was not tolerated. Everybody knew to be on time or else. Lacey wanted to be sure each and every time we were all together that we would have fun, one friend said. Lacey not only taught us proper etiquette, but how to laugh, and not just giggle, but to laugh loud and often. After she and Scott married, they briefly lived apart, with Lacey working in Prunedale and Scott going to school in Morro Bay for some 130 miles away. And what seemed like an innocent separation would set the stage for Scott and his later infidelities. His first extramarital, excuse me, his first extramarital affair with Janet Ilse would be followed by a second serious but reportedly non-sexual relationship with another Cal Poly student, Katie Hansen. Both women dated Scott during the time he lived in San Luis Obispo. It didn't come out in the trial that he had all these affairs. The only one that came out in the trial was this Amber Fry. And wait till we get to her, because she's like one of the main characters. Janet Ilse came forward during the investigation, but Katie Hansen's relationship was reported to police by a friend of hers. When contacted, Katie said that she and Scott studied together and soon started dating casually. On several occasions, they double dated with their roommates. Katie recalled Scott as very bright, congenial, and courtly, and told the police that he never appeared stressed, even under the intense pressures of college exams. Scott started his senior project 2 days before the due date, yet bragged that he had aced it with an A. His college transcripts confirmed the claim. Scott's overall GPA was 3.387 when he graduated in the spring of 1998. Katie and Scott dated for about 2.5 months. Scott enjoyed dancing. He liked going to martini bars, smoking cigars, and playing golf. The two also went on romantic hikes along the trails that crisscrossed the scenic coastal desert town. Scott often brought along his dog, Mackenzie, the golden retriever his wife Lacey had given him on their first Christmas together. His pattern with women was solidifying. Damn. One evening, Scott confided to Katie that he aspired to become the mayor of Fillmore, a small city northwest of Los Angeles, but he first intended to travel. He also dreamed of working at the Newhall Land and Farming Company, a large privately held corporation in eastern Ventura County. Katie never met any of Scott's family or friends outside of his 3 roommates until she learned of Scott's brothers and sisters on the news after Lacey disappeared. She assumed he was an only child. Katie told police that she once asked Scott if she'd ever been engaged or married. He told her no. The following day, he called to apologize, admitting that he lied. He had been married in the past, but was now alone. His ex lived in Salinas. Katie had no reason to doubt him. After all, Scott lived in the house with his roommates, and he didn't wear a wedding band. She had been to his home for dinner and never once saw any woman's clothing or other feminine items in Scott's room. Katie told police that their relationship was never intimate, but she believed it was growing more serious. As graduation day neared, Katie thought the romance would continue. There was no talk of breaking up once Scott graduated, but all that changed on graduation day. Katie was seated next to Scott during the college's closing ceremonies when suddenly a dark-haired woman walked up to him, placed a lei of flowers around his neck, and planted a kiss on him that telegraphed this woman and Scott were seriously involved. Katie was bewildered as Scott calmly introduced the woman as Lacey. When Lacey walked away, Scott reacted as he had when Janet Ilse caught him with his wife. He did not utter another word to Katie that afternoon. She didn't ask any questions. She merely counted her blessings that their relationship had gone no further, for it was obvious that Scott was still married after all. That's fucked up. I mean, just come, it's me and you, Katie, we going on dates with the dog, and you coming over to my apartment with my roommates, and now it's graduation. My wife come up and put flowers around my neck and plants a kiss on my lips and walks away, and it is what it is. And that's that. Cold. Cold. A few weeks later, Katie received 1 dozen pink roses. Scott attached an odd message saying that he had no job, no home. Katie never contacted Scott after receiving the peculiar delivery. This nigga here. You see, they'll always come back and try to see if they can get back through the door. And if you don't open the door, they ain't coming in. Good for you, Katie. No job, no home. The picture of Scott that emerges from these episodes is fascinating. This was a man who was used to being appreciated simply for himself. He was never going to make it as a pro golfer, a rocket scientist, or a captain of industry, but he viewed himself as an exceptional citizen and expected others to do the same. He accepted things as they came, at least on the surface, but later the world would see the double life he led. One, Scott was a gentle, responsible, tolerant husband full of love for his spirited wife. The other was someone having reckless affairs and displaying emotional mood swings, even crying jags with his various mistresses. He was able to lie with abandon, and no one was the wiser. At, tremend- at tremendously upsetting moments, he was capable of turning completely cold, dismissing the upheaval with a half-hearted, "I'm sorry." He seemed to have no empathy with those who suffered from his behavior. Mm, mm, mm. Yeah, he liked the smell of his own ass. Cold, man. Ooh, them cold sociopaths. They are something else, man. Cold. Oof. Roses, courtly behavior, whining and dining. At least Scott was consistent in these and many other ways that would become clear over time. He obviously cared a great deal about his public image. Even on the meager income of a college student, he would lavish flowers, gifts, and expensive meals on his girlfriends. All the women, including Amber Fry, described Scott as a man who went out of his way to be special for them. They all witnessed his charm and apparent sincerity when he wanted something, but also his extraordinary callousness when things didn't go his way. Like others, Janet and Katie were wooed to the brink by Scott, then unceremoniously dropped when his game was over. Scott was truly a player. He would display whatever emotion seemed appropriate at a given moment, but could drop the facade in an instant and move on with no trouble. This would be quite apparent during press interviews in late January, interviews that would become important weapons for the prosecution at trial. He was also a phenomenal and apparently pathological liar. Most people pay a price for lying, if not externally, then internally. Not Scott Peterson. He lied again and again, often about trivial matters and when it was completely unnecessary. Outside of the occasional anguished performance for a girlfriend, he showed no guilt or remorse when caught in deceptions, large or small. He also perceived himself as a special case, whether dropping out of school because he didn't feel sufficiently appreciated by a golf coach or leading a blatantly promiscuous double life. Scott found countless ways to flagrantly violate social norms and demonstrate that the rules simply did not apply to him. Despite his overtly gregarious nature, Scott was actually quite a loner. Whether shallow or secretive, he remained a relative unknown to his friends and associates. Few people professed to know him well. He seemed to adapt to most situations, making those around him feel comfortable. But in hindsight, he never truly let them in. He did have some insecurities. Although Scott moved through several colleges, taking extra time to graduate, he made it known that he thought himself very bright. During the murder investigation, when he heard that an old college professor had been quoted as saying Scott was kind of smart, he retorted angrily, "Kind of smart? I'm real smart." This was another characteristic that would work against Scott as the murder investigation got underway. Inflated sense of self-worth and intelligence. There's no doubt that Scott Peterson is intelligent, but to my mind, his brash lies and flagrant conduct indicated that he truly believed he was a match for the detectives who were investigating him. I'm certain that he expected to survive their scrutiny unscathed. I agree, Cherie. She was very unattractive. And a damn dingbat. A dingbat. Wait till we get up to her. About 2 months before Scott's graduation, around Easter 1998, Lacey moved back in with Scott. Yet, I suspect that Lacey knew in her heart what was going on with Scott, especially after the episode with Janet Ilsey. Yet, apparently, she was willing to accept it. Being from a divorced home, perhaps Lacey was desperate to avoid failure in her own marriage. Hmm. In August, Lacey took a position as a banquet coordinator at Gardens of Avila restaurant at the Sycamore Springs Resort, where she and Scott had been married the previous year. Records indicate that she resigned after only 2 months. In an exit interview, Lacey told the general manager that she was dissatisfied with the woman who was supposed to be training her. She complained that she was constantly belittling to me and was anything but respectful. She also voiced dissatisfaction with two other employees, saying that she had received calls with stupid questions, questions that a little common sense should have answered. She explained that she was offered by her $9 hourly rate. I'm sorry. She explained that she was offended by her $9 hourly rate, even though she knew the salary when she accepted the position. When asked if she would stay on to train an incoming banquet coordinator, she said no. She was reactivating her substitute teacher status on the first of the month. Meanwhile, Scott's parents had made him a partner in Lacey's corrugated box business. Lee had proudly assumed his son would run the enterprise for years to come. But 2 years later, Scott bought out his father's share, then quickly and callously sold the company. Once again, he did what he wanted to do, regardless of the pain inflicted on those who loved him. Scott used the profits from the sale to renovate a vacant building in San Luis Obispo near the Cal Poly campus. There he opened a restaurant he called The Shack, serving beer, wine, and sandwiches. Scott's father characterized The Shack as a sports bar. It seemed to be a success and was voted one of the best happy hour restaurants in the area. Lacey and Scott ran the business for about 2 years. Over time, however, they grew increasingly frustrated. It was difficult to find good help. The employees constantly interrupted their days off. 2 years after the Shack opened its doors, Scott and Lacey opted to sell. Their relatives didn't know how much they received for it. Indeed, no one could say for sure whether the new owner ever fully paid Scott. Still, he seemed relieved to be out of the business. The young couple didn't stay in San Luis Obispo much longer. After her grandmother died in 1999, Lacey wanted to move closer to her parents. The couple lived with Sharon and Ron for about 2 weeks before moving to temporary quarters on Mesquite Road. In October 2000, with a $30,000 gift from Scott's parents, they purchased the house on Covina Avenue. Ain't that nice? You have parents to give you $30,000 as a gift so you could buy a house. My parents could have done that for us, but they was like, fuck you kids, get it on your own. Didn't nobody give us shit. They didn't exactly say it like that. I'm drinking eggnog and rum. But they were like, no, mama may have, papa may have, but God bless the child who has his or her own. So if we wanted a house, we had to work for it how they worked to get theirs. They just didn't believe in giving their children, us, everything that we wanted, especially as we hit adulthood. Nah, you had to get out there and make it on your own. Become your own man and your own woman. The pair often complained that there was little to do in Modesto. Still, they had many friends and they kept their social calendar full, entertaining friends and family. Scott soon began making improvements to their home, adding a swimming pool and brickwork in the backyard in early 2002. He also built a brick barbecue and retiled the bathroom, which he would later claim explained his considerable use of concrete late that year. Mm, mm, mm. Wow. By summertime, Scott had joined the West Coast division of TradeCorp, for whom he sold fertilizers, plant nutrients, and other agricultural products. Traveling to serve his customers kept Scott away from home at least one day each week. After Lacey's disappearance, he told investigators that his business had lost roughly $100,000 over the past year. Documents retrieved from the office confirmed that the new division was far from profitable. Around this time, Lacey Peterson began talking more seriously about having a baby. She had been trying to get pregnant for 2 years with no luck and was beginning to wonder if it was possible. As a child, she had an 8-pound tumor removed from her lower abdomen. During the surgery, doctors had to remove one of her fallopian tubes as well. At the time, doctors told her she should have no trouble becoming pregnant. Now she was losing hope. Wow. That's real personal information. Jesus. She and Scott discussed fertility tests, but before they could pursue the idea, Lacey got the news she'd been waiting for. She was pregnant at last. She was overjoyed, and Scott seemed to share her feelings. Lacey's mother recalled watching Scott hurry over to feel Lacey's stomach when she said the baby was kicking. He seemed as excited as she was. I assume if he didn't want to have a child, he wouldn't have allowed it to happen, Sharon told investigators. Not everyone had the same impression. Lacey's sister-in-law, Rosemarie Rocha, told police about a conversation in the summer of 2001 regarding children and pregnancy. I was kind of hoping for infertility, Scott told her. Although he seemed uncomfortable and hesitant around children, Rocha was heartened by the fact that Scott attended some of Lacey's medical appointments after the pregnancy was announced. Around the time Lacey discovered her pregnancy, Scott commented to Sharon that he had just turned 30 and here he was becoming a father the same year. He thought he was having a midlife crisis. Sharon took it as a joke. Maybe it wasn't. Police subpoenaed Lacey's medical records as part of the investigation. Lacey's first visit to the Hera obstetrics group in Modesto was for an annual exam in June 2001. Medical records show that she had stopped using all contraceptives in December 2000. At this time, she is planning to get pregnant at the end of this year, the office reported. At the time of her initial appointment, the report noted Lacey's height and weight as 5 foot 1 inch and 125 pounds. According to records I obtained in my investigation, Lacey's pregnancy was normal. There were several notations about her excessive weight gain, and she was advised to watch her diet and increase her level of exercise. On November 6th and again November 8th, Lacey called the doctor's office. She said she was experiencing shortness of breath after a 20-minute walk and was concerned. She was advised to eat first and take the walks later in the day, the record stated. Lacey was described as a social drinker, yet she apparently stopped drinking once she became pregnant. She had no known enemies, did not use illicit drugs, and had no history of mental illness. A police check showed that Lacey had never been a victim of a violent crime. However, friends revealed that her high school sweetheart had pushed her once during an argument, and when the police examined the relationship further, it was apparently more violent than Lacey ever admitted. Early in the investigation, Brent Rocha would tell police about this troubled relationship and ask them to investigate. In a twist of irony, that boyfriend, William Kent Gain, later attempted to murder another girlfriend. By the time Lacey disappeared, he was incarcerated in a Washington state prison, serving a 15-year prison term for the crime. Gain would later send heartfelt missives to a Lacey Peterson tribute website, professing grief and love for his former girlfriend. Even today, he reportedly keeps pictures of Lacey posted in his cell. This gives me pause to ponder. What was it about Lacey that attracted such guys who killed their girlfriends or wives? Like, she was a magnet for these type of guys. Well, it's only two, this ex-boyfriend here and Scott. I always find it fascinating. Like, I got a friend who often attracts mentally ill men. The craziest niggas. I mean, really crazy individuals. I don't know. And I think all of us tend to attract certain types of people. Um, There are men who attract batshit crazy bitches. They go from one batshit crazy bitch to the next. I always wonder what that's about. Lacey Peterson then had already endured one encounter with domestic violence. Yet, as the Department of Justice's missing person report pointed out, even though persons close to her believed under normal circumstances she would have physically resisted an assault, her advanced stage of pregnancy and resultant limitations would have likely hampered any attempt to defend herself. In November, Lacey began attending a maternity yoga class, which met Mondays at noon. People in the neighborhood told investigators that they saw her walking her dog during that period, but as the pregnancy advanced, Lacey complained of exhaustion. Relatives told police that she even used a wheelchair while visiting Disneyland with Scott's parents and half sister Ann Bird, although Bird would later say this chair was just a gag to please Lacey. In our interview, Ann told me that Lacey looked radiant during that trip. She was excited about having the baby and talked a lot about how much she loved her mother, Sharon. Ann first met Lacey in March of 1998, about 7 months after the wedding. She liked her immediately. Lacey filled up the room, loved being the center of attention, and rarely let anyone else get a word in edgewise. Like Lacey's other girlfriends, Ann agreed that Lacey did boss Scott around. And like those women, Ann wished she had a husband like Scott, who did everything his wife told him with a smile. Hmm. Yeah, you saw that smile on the outside, but look what was brewing behind that smile. That smile was a mask. Underneath that shit, he was seething with anger, murderous anger. Ann also attended Lacey's baby shower along with nearly 50 other women. At one point, she recalled Lacey was stifling laughter over a close friend of Jackie's who turned up in go-go boots. Ann recognized the woman from several pictures hanging in Jackie's house. Weird people, she mouthed to Ann as her sister-in-law tried to keep a straight face. By the time the due date approached, Scott and Lacey were spending money quite freely. They went all out decorating the inside of their home, splurging on new furnishings, especially in the nursery. From the outside, however, the house looked unkempt and in need of repairs. Scott still played golf regularly, and when his parents ponied up the $23,000 admission fee on December 1st, he joined the Del Rio Country Club. The $390 monthly dues was Scott's responsibility. I wish I did go to my parents talking about, yeah, I want to join a country club. Can you pony up the $23,000? I wouldn't even dream of wasting my breath with such a request of my parents. Must be nice. The couple enjoyed entertaining. Their friends knew Lacey to be a gourmet cook. According to her friends, Lacey put a great deal of effort into her appearance. Spa treatments, manicures, and pedicures were part of her normal routine. She also loved shopping and was described as a clothes horse. She used the internet to search for Christmas presents and scoped out the local malls on a regular basis. While she loved finding a bargain, she didn't hesitate to pay full price if she wanted a particular item. Lacey kept a running list of new objects the couple had agreed to buy for their home. Her long-range goals included having more children and buying a larger house and new vehicle, even as she planned to remain a stay-at-home mom. During one conversation with Sharon, Scott joked that they might have to pitch a tent in his mother-in-law's driveway if their spending habits weren't restrained. 2 days before her disappearance, Lacey's brother Brent phoned from his home in Elk Grove to find out about the couple's plans for Christmas. He asked if he could bring their grandfather, Robert Rocha, down from his nursing home in Sacramento on Christmas morning. Lacey readily agreed. After a 10:30 brunch, everyone could open presents. She and Scott would purchase a fruit basket or something similar for their grandfather. In hindsight, it all seems like a charade. Scott spent so much time and money decorating Connor's rooms, taking Lacey's ring into the jeweler for Christmas, rushing over to feel his baby kick, despite telling others he was hoping for infertility. But on December 23rd, 2002, Scott seemed to be planning nothing more than a quiet holiday, entertaining family, and enjoying his wife's company. I just need to take a break for a minute. Let's see.
It's so good loving somebody, and somebody loves you back. To be loved and be loved in return, it's the only thing that my heart desires. Just appreciate the little things I do. Oh, you're the one who's got me inspired. Keep on lifting me higher. So good, loving somebody, and somebody loves you back. It's so good, needing somebody, and somebody needs you back. We can build a world of love and of joy, make our goal each other's happiness. I will do for you anything that I can. Oh, every day I want to do a little more, just a little bit more. It's so good, loving somebody, and somebody loves you back, and that's a fact. It's so good, wanting somebody, and somebody wants you back. So it's so good. And be loved in return, it's the only thing that my heart desires. Just appreciate little things I do. Oh, you're the one who's got me inspired. Keep on lifting me higher. So good, loving somebody, and somebody loves you back, and that's a fact. It's so good, needing somebody, and somebody needs you back. See, I said today, got 64 there, talking about 50-50 love. got 70, 30, got 60, 40. Talking about 50, 50 love. Yeah. It's so good, good. Love is somebody, and somebody else you got. It's so good, good. I'm so glad that there's you. I've experienced over and over again where I'm giving 80% and she's giving 20%. And she's giving 70% and I'm giving 30%. But you just don't know how it feels to have somebody that you can share your whole life. Somebody that you don't mind talking to, somebody that you don't mind going down the middle of the road. I know a lot of guys today, they wish they had somebody just like you. I don't know when the last time that I told you, but girl, you make me so very happy. I think we've got something that a lot of people don't seem to have. Talking about 50-50 love, yeah.
Oh, gone are the days of those good old songs where they like to talk shit on a record. I think I'm going to find me another one of those joints. Yeah, sometimes I just got to take a little break. I'm going to try and read 50 pages every night. I'm going to try just so that we can keep things kind of even. So we are on chapter 4. And it is a thick chapter, as they all have been. So after I read this chapter, it would be 54 pages, and that's okay. Little 4 pages over. Not a big deal. But here we go. Searches is the title of this chapter. Over the next 3 days, police conducted a number of searches of Scott's house, warehouse, and boat. They initiated grid searches by air and bloodhound searches on the ground, and their work yielded valuable clues, only some of which the jury heard about during the trial. The following pages are based on the complete record of those searches, along with unpublished conversations between police and Scott Peterson. By December 26, 2002, Scott's office on Emerald Street was under surveillance. No one could enter the business until the pending search warrant had been served. I felt that if evidence was present at the Emerald Avenue location, evidence destruction at that location could be completed without witnesses in the remote and mostly unoccupied industrial area in the late evening and early morning hours, Detective Craig Grogan reported. Members of the Modesto Fire Department were combing the Tulum River area of Dry Creek Park, and the neighborhood canvass was underway, with officers going from house to house, looking for individuals who may have seen anything out of the ordinary. As per Grogan's instruction, police also compiled a list of potential suspects, focusing on prior offenders and known sex offenders in the area. He told Officer Tom CRIER to highlight any transients with violent backgrounds. Just before 10, Detective Grogan received a call. An officer in the field had just interviewed a woman who claimed to have seen a female in the early morning hours of December 24th, dressed in black pants and white shirt. She said the woman was pregnant and walking a dog. Another tip came in from a woman named Diana Campos, a 46-year-old custodian at Stanislaus County Hospital. At 10:45 a.m., while on a smoke break outside the hospital, Campos said she had seen three people and a dog together in a park heading west. She watched the three as they walked roughly the distance of a football field. The dog, a golden retriever, was barking incessantly, and the female was tugging on the lead as if trying to calm him. One of the men who had I just read a misprint. The dog, a golden retriever, was barking incessantly, and the female was tugging on the leash, but it says lead, as if trying to calm him. One of the men, who had what Campos described as a beanie cap atop his head, shouted, "Shut the fucking dog up!" Campos watched them as she puffed on her cigarette, but did not sense any serious conflict among the individuals. In fact, she thought nothing of the sighting until December 26th, when she saw a flyer describing Lacey Peterson. When I looked at the flyer, I said to myself, I know the girl. She insisted that the woman she had seen in Moose Park was Lacey Peterson, and told Detective Owen that she would not have called the police unless she was sure. Yet Campos backpedaled slightly a few minutes later, saying only that she was pretty sure. "I'm real good with faces," she told the detectives. Campos described the woman as wearing a white top and sweatpants with dark shoulder-length hair. She appeared to be 6 or 7 months pregnant. The golden retriever was medium in size with brownish red fur, but Campos could not recall the color of its leash. She described both men as in their 30s, 5'7", with medium builds. One wore beanie-style cap, dirty clothes, a dark shirt, and blue jeans. The second man had short brown hair and was dressed in jeans and a torn denim jacket. Campbell said she was about 50 feet away from the group. Over the course of the investigation, there would be several more reports like these, but no timeline was ever established. While Scott's defense lawyer, Mark Garagos, promised to produce these folks at trial, he never did. He was able to inject some of the information during cross-examination of police officers, but during his case in chief, none of these people took the stand. Around noon, Detective Al Brocchini began tracking Scott's alibi. When he spoke with the Berkeley Marina harbor master, Ray Forsberg, the man was adamant it had not rained at the marina on December 24th. This information directly contradicted the story Scott had told Brocchini only 24 hours before, and prompted the men to secure a search warrant. After hearing Forsberg's report, Brocchini went straight to police headquarters, where he and Detective Grogan completed search warrant applications for 523 Covina Avenue and 1027 Emerald Avenue. On the surface, these two officers seemed cut from the same cloth, short and stocky, each of them sporting the business suit of a plainclothes detective. Yet, there were critical differences between the two. Brocchini, his dark hair cut in a military style, had a well-defined chin, broad facial features, and frameless eyeglasses. He was quicker to react and to confront or challenge a witness. Grogan, whose brown hair was tinged with red, sported a thick mustache and bright, observant eyes, the more seasoned of the two. He was much more low-key. Early in the investigation, Scott would accuse Brocchini of trying to trick him. Grogan was much more likely to assume the good cop role, and it was he who proved better able to engage Scott in the cat and mouse game they would play in the coming days. Applications in hand, the two investigators hurried to the courthouse to obtain a judge's approval for the searches. As they arrived, Grogan's cell phone rang. A detective posted outside Scott's warehouse was calling to let him know that a man driving a bronze Ford F-150 had pulled up, wanting to retrieve a computer from the office. The man whom the police turned away was Scott Peterson. The officer told him to contact Grogan or Brokini for more information. At 3:10, Judge Nancy Ashley signed the warrants, clearing the way for the search. And before Brokini could get out of the room, his phone rang as well. It was Scott, asking why a warrant was necessary. The detective explained that it was just a precaution, reminding Scott that he reneged on his agreement to take a polygraph just moments before it was scheduled. Scott suggested that the detectives meet him at headquarters for the 3:30 press briefing. They could discuss the search then. Moments later, the officers were standing in the hallway outside the press room. Then Scott called again, changing the rules. He'd left the news conference early, he said. Now he wanted the men to come to his house. Before they could leave, Lacey's stepfather approached. Gransky said that his son-in-law had just gotten up and walked out of the press conference, obviously angry at reporters' questions about his behavior. At 4 o'clock, I'm going to pause. I'm going to pause. Let's see if I can insert the actual news conference clips. Let me see. Hold on. Because for those of you who are not familiar with this story, I can actually pull up real video. Let me see if I can find it. Let me see. Let's see if I can find it. It's a daggone shame they don't have any of this. I mean, they have, I see stuff when he was, being interviewed by the police. Come on. Let's see if I can find another one. Well, no, they don't have none of that, unfortunately. Oh man, if I could only revisit those press conferences that were held, I tell you, it was riveting. It was riveting. So I am just scrolling a little bit, just trying to find. I see nothing, no press conferences or anything. You think everything is on YouTube, right? Not so. Oh, well, so much for that. I tried. Okay. At 4 o'clock, the officers edged their vehicle around a line of media satellite trucks and pulled up to the Peterson house. Dozens of journalists had staked out the home, waiting for updates on the case. The media was there at Scott's disposal, but he had no intention of using them to find Lacey. In fact, he was clearly avoiding them. Caught in behind the Modesto Police Department sawhorses, the reporters all missed what happened next. The jury was never allowed to hear what Scott and the officers discussed that afternoon, including a telling conversation with Jackie Peterson. Scott's antics over the search warrant for 523 Covina and the full details of the bloodhound searches conducted at his home and warehouse. Through a window, the detectives could see Scott sitting alone at the dining table, calmly perusing a newspaper. Your pregnant wife is missing and you just perusing a newspaper at the dining room table, right? Okay. They knocked, and without rising, Scott yelled, "Come in." He invited them to join him at the long wood table. Scott had gone to the warehouse, he said, to get a photograph of Lacey off his office computer for a flyer he was preparing. He was perturbed that he wasn't told about the lockdown of his office or the pending search, and reiterated that he would have given permission if the detectives had simply asked. Just 36 hours into the investigation, Scott was already displaying his arrogance, trying to seize the upper hand and setting up confrontations with the very people who were there to help find Lacey. He was telegraphing a message. This is my territory. I'm in charge here. Grogan interjected, redirecting the conversation to the importance of a timely search. There might be evidence of a stranger entering the home, then cleaning up to eliminate signs of an attack. He also explained that searching Scott's place of business, his vehicles, and his computers might provide clues of a stalker, or even Lacey's possible involvement with another man. Scott listened intently, nodding his head as if agreeing with the comments. From his demeanor, the investigators assumed he would agree to the searches. Producing waivers that eliminated the need for a warrant, the detectives asked Scott for his signature. Scott read the papers intently, then looked up. "You don't expect me to sign these right now, do you? I'm going to have to consult with an attorney before I sign anything." Grogan shrugged. "Have you retained an attorney?" Handing back the waivers, Scott replied, "I've made some calls, but have not hired anyone yet." At that point, Sergeant Ron Cloward entered the room and interrupted the exchange. He needed an article of Lacey's clothing to use in the canine search. Scott allowed him to take Lacey's brown hairbrush, a pink Jones of New York slipper, a pair of Ralph Lauren sunglasses, and a brown eyeglass case. Cloward also retrieved an item of Scott's, a green and blue slipper from the Gap. "Are you writing down the items that you're taking?" Scott asked. "Yes," Grogan replied. As a uniformed officer prepared to slip, Scott interrupted, sliding some papers across the table to prevent the cop from scratching the wooden table as he wrote. As Detective Brocchini noted, it was just like Scott's behavior with Lacey's Land Rover. However disengaged he may have seemed from his wife's disappearance, he was clearly eager to protect property that had value to him. As the detective made another note of Scott's unusual concerns, Cloward offered Scott his receipt for the borrowed items, and Scott readily accepted. Around 4:30, Jackie and Lee Peterson arrived at the house. Scott's mother had just left the news conference. She was complaining about Chief Wasden's comment that it would be strange for Lacey to go walking without a cell phone. "Everybody knows Lacey's cell phone had been dead for weeks," she griped. "So why would she be taking it on walks with her?" When I read this in the police report, I wondered why Jackie was interpreting this comment as an indictment of her son. She was already feeling the need to protect him. Was this because she knew something about Lacey, or simply because she had done it so often in the past? Brocchini knew that Lacey's cell phone was dead. He had checked it in the previous evening. If what Jackie Peterson was saying was true, he asked, then why did Scott leave a message on that cell phone Christmas Eve? Exactly. Oh, this old raggedy bitch boy. "I was just repeating what other people said," she snapped. As the afternoon wore on, more officers were dispatched to 523 Covina to assist with crowd control. They were setting up wooden sawhorses to contain the growing throng of They were setting up wooden sawhorses to contain the growing throng when a woman ran out of the house across the street, screaming that she'd been robbed. Susan Medina excitedly explained that she and her husband Rodolfo had just returned from their holiday in Los Angeles to find their home ransacked. Officers Fainter and Myers followed her to investigate. The point of entry was clearly the south of the Medina's home at 516 Covina, where a set of French doors had been kicked in. A shoe print was visible on the right door below the handle. Drawers were open and closets tossed throughout the dwelling. Rodolfo Medina told the officers that a personal safe in the master bedroom, which had been concealed by maroon bed sheets, was missing. A hammer and a glove were found inside the master suite. The burglar had apparently used a hammer to crack the safe. A hand truck stored inside the owner's tool shop behind the house was now on the porch. The intruder must have used it to transport the safe to the front of the house. In the backyard, police found items taken from the tool shed, including an air compressor and a gas-powered leaf blower. A number of power tools were missing. Officers wanted a list of people who knew about the Medina's holiday plans and the names of businesses and persons who had been to the residence. They fingerprinted family members before leaving. This burglary would become important to Scott's defense in the months to come. Across the way at the Peterson residence, an attorney named Ross Lee was meeting with Scott in the rear bedroom. When Lee emerged, he introduced himself as Trade Corps' corporate attorney and told the officers that he had referred Scott to a criminal lawyer, Kirk McAllister. Scott returned to the dining room and said he left a message for McAllister. He pulled up a chair at the table where his father Lee and his sister Susan Cordillo were talking with Captain Christopher Boyer. Boyer headed up the Contra Costa County Emergency Services Search and Rescue and was in charge of the K-9 team assigned to search the area around the Petersons' home. Linda Valentine, a dog handler, was also present. While everyone waited for a call from Scott's attorney, Captain Boyer interviewed Scott in preparation for the Bloodhound search. Brocchini listened quietly as Scott responded to Boyer's questions. He paid close attention as Scott detailed the items of clothing he said his wife had been wearing on the morning of her disappearance. The black maternity pants and white long-sleeved blouse with a crew neck. What type of shoes was Lacey wearing? Boyer inquired. Scott replied that his wife was barefoot when he left. What shoes does Lacey normally wear before she goes walking? White tennis shoes, he replied. Were any tennis shoes missing? Brocchini was surprised to hear Scott say he hadn't yet checked. Nor had he looked to see if any of her jackets were missing. This critical information could help determine whether she had gone for a walk or was abducted from inside of the home. Captain Boyer left the residence to begin the search, and Brocchini followed him outside. Boyer commented that in his 20 years of experience, this was the first time he had ever been asked for a receipt for items taken to help locate a missing person. Brocchini just nodded. It was 5 o'clock before Grogan again asked Scott if he had talked to a lawyer about the search waivers. Not yet, he replied. Grogan then pulled some papers from his pocket and began to recite. I have prepared a search warrant that covers your home, vehicles, boats, and place of work. The searches will be carried out over a period of a few days in a very slow and methodical way to hopefully find evidence that will aid in our investigation of Lacey's disappearance. Scott's reaction was immediate. Where's the trust? He demanded, looking directly at Brokini. Why did you fill out these forms and ask if you could search if you already had a warrant? It was then that Scott accused Brokini of tricking him on Christmas Eve. Brokini had left his keys in Scott's car that first night and his notebook in Scott's boat. Now Scott was suggesting that Brokini had staged the whole thing to give him an excuse to go back and take a second look. Scott said, I took his gun out of his car and took his mop bucket and wet towels on Christmas Eve without telling him. I reminded Scott that he consented to the evidence search on Christmas Eve, and I apologized that I did not immediately tell him what I had taken. Scott agreed, but said he felt betrayed since I did not tell him about the items I took until he asked. Brokini noted in his ongoing police report. Grogan explained that he wasn't confident Scott would allow the search, but had wanted to give him the opportunity to consent. Scott's change of heart over the polygraph, after all, was the only behavior Grogan had to go on. Now the detective told Scott he would have to vacate the house within 15 minutes and would need permission to remove anything when he left. With warrant in hand, Scott strode to the kitchen counter, grabbed a piece of paper, and thrust it at Brokini. Here, Scott said. It was a 2-day fishing license dated December 23rd and December 24th, 2002. He must have seen the item listed on the warrant. As the investigator placed it in his folder, the telephone rang. It was Kirk McAllister, the attorney. Scott took the call in a back bedroom. Moments later, he returned, telling Detective Grogan that the lawyer wanted to speak with him. McAllister informed Grogan that he now represented Peterson and had informed his client not to speak further without an attorney present. McAllister knew there were questions his client should address, and Scott would make himself readily available. However, he had advised Scott not to take a polygraph. Just before 6 o'clock, Scott Peterson and his family gathered their belongings and headed to the front door. Grogan stopped Scott and asked for a set of keys to his truck, home, and business. Scott handed them over, then quickly left the house. Brokini and Grogan secured the premises, then left as well. Grogan and Brokini then joined Captain Boyer and the other dog handlers in Dry Creek Park, and Grogan listened as Boyer detailed his current findings. Based on the dog's behavior, he believed that Lacey had left the residence in a vehicle, not on foot. After the dogs picked up her scent, they ran right down the middle of Covina Avenue, following the trail rather than tracking on the sidewalk. The primary tracker, a bloodhound named Merlin, started at the Petersons' house, then headed north on Covina Avenue, west on Edgebrook Drive, and then south on Highland Drive. At Santa Barbara Avenue, he turned east until he reached La Loma Avenue. The animal went to the rear of a check cashing establishment at the corner of La Loma and Yosemite Boulevard, then continued westbound on Yosemite. He stopped in the area of Santa Rosa Avenue, where he turned south. At that point, Merlin's handler, Cindy Valentin, wasn't sure if the dog was still following the trail. The dog's behavior was now different from when he had earlier distinct alert, she told Grogan. The dog's behavior was now different from when he had the earlier distinct alert, she told Grogan, a deputy lieutenant with the Contra Costa Sheriff's Department. Valentin had joined the search dog steering committee of the state's Office of Emergency Services a year ago. The agency was responsible for the development and publication of statewide guidelines for all search and rescue dogs in California. Valentin worked as a horse trainer before expanding to professional dog training in 1991. Her unique background also included positions as an evaluator and trainer for several state certifying agencies for working dogs. Valentin explained that the dog tracking Lacey ran in a manner consistent with a vehicle trail as opposed to a trail left by a person that was walking. Grogan asked Valentin to take Merlin to Scott's warehouse. Valentin agreed, but requested that the pair start at a nearby intersection. She wanted to see where, if at all, Merlin would pick up Lacey's scent. Them dogs are something else. This dog was able to track the scent of this woman. What is this, like 2 days after her disappearance? Amazing. At 9:30 p.m., Detective Brocchini, Lieutenant Valentin, and Merlin were standing at the intersection of Kansas Avenue and Emerald, about 3 miles south of Scott's business. Valentin herself did not know where Scott's business was. Brocchini watched as the animal sniffed Lacey's sunglasses case to pick up the scent, walked around in a circle on Emerald Avenue, then after only a few seconds began trotting south on Emerald. Brocchini followed Valentin and Boyer as they chased Merlin through the intersection at Kansas. The dog's tail was up as he trotted at a steady pace down the center of the street. Merlin ran into the parking lot of a laundromat at the southeast corner of Kansas and Emerald, slowing slightly, then trotted back onto southbound Emerald. Merlin continued south on Emerald to Lolita. Then Brocchini asked Valentin to stop the dog. The dog was then returned to the initial starting point. Again, he ran south through the intersection, following the exact route he had just taken. The officer stopped Merlin on southbound Emerald near Loletta. The dog handler told Brocchini that there was no doubt in her mind that Merlin was following Lacey's strongest scent. That scent was leading him southbound on Emerald. The dog was tracking away from Scott's business, not toward it. He asked Valentine and Boyer to explain what the strongest scent would be if Lacey had been driven to a location, remained at that site for an hour or more, then was driven away. They explained that the most recent scent, when Lacey left the location, would be the strongest. Lieutenant Valentin then asked Brocchini to take her to the business. She explained that she needed to have a starting place or a stopping place when conducting a bloodhound scent search to testify in court. Brocchini took Valentin and Boyer to the parking lot of Scott's warehouse at 1027 Emerald and showed them Suite B. The detective watched as she let Merlin out in the center of the parking lot and walked him towards Scott's place of business. Once the dog neared the suite, his tail immediately went up, indicating he had picked up Lacey's scent. And Merlin immediately began trotting eastbound away from the business down the north driveway. The detective trailed Valentin and her dog east through the parking lot and followed as the dog again took off southbound on Emerald right down the middle of the street. The group continued south past Kansas Avenue until they reached the intersection of Emerald and Highway 132. Merlin slowed down at the intersection, appearing to have lost Lacey's scent. Deputy Boyer explained that a large intersection with heavy traffic, such as this one, sometimes mixed up the scent. Valentin said it would take the dog to a short time to relocate the scent. Next, they did an exercise called the Four Corners, walking the dog around the entire intersection. In the process, Merlin relocated Lacey's scent and took off westbound, down the center of Highway 132. Brocchini and the others followed the dog about 400 yards before pulling up. It appeared the dog would have continued running on the highway if they hadn't stopped him. Valentin told Brocchini she could testify that Merlin followed Lacey's scent from 1027 North Emerald southbound, then westbound on Highway 132. I told him again that this trail was consistent with a vehicle trail. Valentin later wrote in her official report. Brocchini realized that the path Merlin had taken was the exact route Scott Peterson had driven to go fishing. The detective later measured the distance from Scott's place of business to the spot where the dog was pulled up. Merlin had trailed Lacey Peterson's scent 1.1 miles. It was after 10:30 in the evening when Lieutenant Valentin and Merlin completed the search around 1027 Emerald Avenue. Captain Boyer gave the detective all the items they had used: Lacey's pink slipper, her Ralph Lauren sunglasses and case, her brown hairbrush, and her husband's Gap slipper. It had been a very long day, but Brocchini went back to headquarters to examine Scott's truck, impounded earlier that evening. His search proved fruitless. During the search, I did not see Peterson's tan camouflage jacket that I had seen in the truck on 12/24/02. I did not see the big 5 bag containing 2 fishing lures, the backyard umbrellas that were wrapped in a blue tarp, the tan colored tarp that had been bunched up in the back of the truck, or the shotgun shells I saw in the green toolbox. Brocchini later wrote, it appeared that Scott had removed several items from the truck between 12/24/02 and the time the search warrant was served. Brocchini did find a partial roll of chicken wire and a small hand tool that had a gardening fork on one side and a hoe on the other. I got one of those. The tool was coated with dry cement, he wrote. It looked like it was used to mix ready-mix cement, and there was loose ready-mix cement in the bed of the truck. In the subsequent search, police found what appeared to be 4 small bloodstains on the interior side of the driver's door. A suspected bloodstain was also collected from the back of the steering wheel. Following a preliminary inspection, the pickup was turned over to the FBI forensic evidence team, which had traveled from Sacramento to assist the police. Members of the team sprayed the questionable stains with hemoglow, a fluid used to detect blood stains. All the areas fluoresced. In addition, an area of the interior door pocket and on the vehicle's door handle tested positive. At 10:45, Detective Grogan received a call from Scott Peterson asking about the bloodhound search. I thought you wasn't supposed to speak to them without an attorney. Why are you calling him? The detective advised him that the dogs had tracked away from his home through a series of residential streets down to Yosemite Boulevard, then turned west. During the 5-minute conversation, Grogan admitted that the dog had lost his scent after traveling a distance on Yosemite. Have you been able to get any sleep? Grogan asked before hanging up that night. The detective recorded Scott's reply. He did not sleep well in a different bed. He now had the comfort in his own home with the smell of Lacey in their bed. Mm. Within 24 hours of Lacey's disappearance, her family and friends set up a command center at a local inn, the Red Lion Hotel, to assist police in their search for Lacey. The general manager, Brad Saltzman, donated rooms for the effort. Thousands of flyers with Lacey's photo and reward information were printed. Hundreds of people hit the streets in those first days, distributing the materials and searching the Modesto area for signs of Lacey. Sharon and Ron Gratzky and Jackie and Lee Peterson were out before the cameras in these early days, but Scott was nowhere to be found. The young husband and father-to-be was declining all requests for television appearances, telling journalists that he wanted to keep the focus on Lacey, not on him. This was unusual behavior for anyone in Scott's position, and in fact, it brought about the opposite result. Scott's absence quickly became a topic of interest in the press. Ironically, I later learned that it was one of Scott's parents, either Jackie or Lee, who had alerted the national media to the story through a connection with the Associated Press. It is my belief that Scott never expected the media attention that this case drew. I think he also miscalculated the abilities of the 270-member Modesto Police Department. He probably thought that some small-town cops on Christmas Eve were no match for him and expected the story to disappear rapidly from the news when Lacey's body could not be found. If so, Scott Peterson chose the wrong small-town cops. The MPD has a 90% homicide clearance rate, almost a third better than the national average. Detective Craig Grogan dispatched officers to the Berkeley Marina, where Scott Peterson said he had launched his boat on the day Lacey disappeared. The temperature was a cool 52 degrees. The December air humid, as Sergeant Andy Schlenker and Detective Rick Meteries pulled into the marina parking area at 201 University Avenue on December 27th. The Golden Gate Bridge and San Francisco skyline were buried in a dense layer of morning fog as the officers stepped out of their car. The marina, owned and operated by the city of Berkeley, is administered by the Parks and Waterfront Department. The expansive facility encompasses 52 acres of water, includes 975 berths. Wow. Also on the grounds are several restaurants, a DoubleTree hotel, and a 3,000-foot-long public fishing pier. The parking lot immediately north of the marina's boat basin includes a 4-lane launch ramp that is open to the public. An automated Iron Ranger ticket machine stands next to the boat ramp, providing customers a receipt upon payment of the $5 launch fee. As Detective Armendariz snapped photos of the area, Sergeant Schlenker located groundskeeper Mike Ilvesta. Ilvesta confirmed that members of the press had been canvassing the landing pier, trying to find anyone who had seen Scott on December 24th. Ilvesta was working that day from about 6:30 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. He recalled that there were few visitors to the marina that day, and although the day was cloudy and overcast, it had not rained, despite what Scott had told the police. Over the gentle clanging of sailboat riggings, Ilvesta described seeing a new full-size dark green Ford 4x4 extended cab pickup truck with a small boat trailer arrive around 12:45 p.m. on December 24th. The Ford's trailer was empty, and the vehicle was backing into the ramp area. The driver was a white male in his 30s with sandy-colored hair, wearing what looked like a polo shirt. The Ford was blocking Ilvesta's path, and the driver was having trouble backing the trailer down the ramp. Ilvesta waited while the man drove back and forth, trying to align the truck and trailer. After several minutes, the driver succeeded, and Ilvesta was able to pass. Ilvesta left the area and continued with his workday. Producing a photograph of Scott's bronze pickup Armendariz showed it to Ilvesta. The groundskeeper said that while the truck he had seen looked similar, he couldn't be certain it was the same one. The detectives next showed Ilvesta a photo lineup that included a picture of Scott. Ilvesta studied the images but didn't recognize the driver of the Ford. Armendariz then produced a picture of Lacey and asked if he had ever seen her at the marina. He had not. The investigators next interviewed the marina's waterfront manager, Cliff Marchetti. Marchetti had spent much of December 24th working in the office on the south shore of the grounds across the boat-filled marina. He did not go over to the boat launch area, and he had not seen any customers. He did confirm investors' account of the weather as cloudy with overcast, but no rain. Marchetti said it would be unusual for a fisherman to take a 14-foot aluminum boat out on the bay in late December because of weather conditions and the fishing season. He explained that crab fishing was the only type of fishing a person can do in a boat at this time of year. All other fishing was out of season, he explained. Two workers at the marina's bait shop said they did not remember seeing anybody in the boat launch area on December 24th. They too remembered it as a cloudy but not rainy day. In addition to a crab, they said the only fish likely to be caught were sand dabs, a flatfish, and possibly perch and sturgeon. The detectives next drove to a Chevron gas station on Frontage Road in the city of Livermore, trying to establish where Scott allegedly bought fuel. The assistant manager told them that he had worked Christmas Eve and provided police with the surveillance tape for that day. He then directed the officers to another Chevron station on North Vasco Road, where they retrieved another surveillance tape. Meanwhile, at the Adobe-style police headquarters in downtown Modesto, Detective Bueller was interviewing two of Lacey's friends, Stacy Boyers and Lori Ellsworth. Lacey's friends had briefly met the tall, rugged detective at the Red Line Hotel on Christmas Day. He'd been working round the clock since the case broke. For Bueller, the Peterson case came on the heels of a double homicide he had been assigned 10 days earlier. The long hours were taxing on the divorced dad. While his ex-wife cared for their daughter, Bueller had full custody of his teenage son and needed to be home for him. Bueller had been managing well enough thus far. His boy was getting A's and B's in school, but the night calls were hard. When his son was younger, Bueller sometimes bundled it up in a blanket and took him along to crime scenes, leaving him to sleep in the back of the unmarked car while he conducted his investigation. He had gotten a scare of his life one night when he returned to his vehicle to find the boy gone. He combed the area frantically until moments later he found his son in a CSI truck talking with the guys. With only that brief but terrifying experience to go by, he knew he could not imagine how the Rochers were coping. Bueller gave Lacey friends an update on the case. Police were examining several possible scenarios. One based on the assumption that a stranger had entered the Petersons' house, committed an act of violence, and taken Lacey's body away. The second involving Scott. Both Stacy and Lori told Bueller they thought it was more likely that Scott was responsible. They were growing increasingly suspicious as the days passed. Your friends would know. Stacy had been at the Peterson home on Christmas Day and observed Scott doing an unusual amount of vacuuming in the laundry room and in the living room near the chairs and couch. And when she questioned him, he said he was just trying to occupy himself. If Lacey were there, he said, she would be doing the same thing because she was extremely clean. Both women found his remark strange. They knew Lacey and Scott quite well, and while Lacey was a big fan of Martha Stewart's entertaining style, neither she nor Scott seemed like clean freaks. Stacy also told Beulah that on Thursday evening, when Scott and his family were told to leave the residence before the search, Scott announced that he was growing angry. He didn't like being taken out of his comfort zone, he told Stacy. Yet, neither woman believed there was any trouble in the couple's relationship and could not direct Beulah to anyone who might disagree. As Beulah took notes, Stacy told the officer that she and Lacey had been best friends since the third grade. She'd last spoken with her on December 23rd around 4:45 in the afternoon when Lacey called to talk about the holidays and her pregnancy. The mom-to-be complained that she was physically uncomfortable, but said she was excited about becoming a mother. Stacy knew that Lacey had experienced female problems in the past and confirmed that she was overjoyed with her pregnancy. Lacey had recently begun complaining about her breathing, and Stacy suggested that she give up her walks in Dry Creek Park. It seemed unlikely that she went walking in the area of Thousand Oaks Park. Detective Beulah concluded after speaking with Lacey's friends. This location would require one to walk down and return up several grades. Despite Scott's overnight trips, Stacy had never heard Lacey express any mistrust of her husband. Lacey was not the jealous type, she said, and she had never heard the two quarrel or complain. Then around 5:15 p.m. on December 24th, Scott had called Stacy in a panic. Stacy probably got the time wrong by a few minutes at 5:17. Scott was just talking to Sharon Rocha. He told Stacy that the police were on the way and said something about his dog being found by a neighbor in the front yard. He asked Stacy if she knew anyone who drove a white Ranger, but she had no idea what that question meant. Lori Ellsworth spoke up next. She and Lacey were close. They spoke every couple of weeks, and she often attended dinner parties at the Petersons. Lori confirmed that Lacey had seemed tired in recent days. It made no sense that she would have been walking Mackenzie in the park on Christmas Eve, nor did Lori believe that Lacey would leave home without her cell phone at this stage in her pregnancy. Lori also described the couple's golden retriever as a barker and believed Mackenzie would make noise if someone tried to approach his mistress. Both women said they had never heard Lacey discuss the couple's finances, but thought that she and Scott were doing fine, assuming that between them they were earning more than $80,000 a year. The women described the jewelry that Lacey had recently inherited. The pieces were very important to Lacey. She'd been wearing several of them in late November, and when the women got together to watch The Bachelor. The jewelry was not really Lacey's style, but she refused to leave the pieces at home because she feared they might be stolen. The detective asked about Lacey's mental state. He had heard rumors that Lacey had been depressed. Both women disagreed. Although she was struggling with her physical limitations, which kept her from enjoying the holidays as much as she normally would, she knew the pregnancy would soon be over and her health would return as normal. Both Stacy and Lori conceded that their family members' opinion of Scott were becoming more divided as time went by, particularly as Scott's flat affect contrasted ever more dramatically with Sharon Roach's fear and grief. Beulah also interviewed Zake Zimet, a retired highway patrol officer and Stacy's boyfriend for the past 4 months. When he and Stacy had thrown a holiday party on December 14th, he noted Lacey arrived alone. Her husband was at a business function, she said, and couldn't attend. A photograph was taken at that party of a very pregnant Lacey in a festive red pantsuit, would become a mainstay of media reports throughout this case. Although she was smiling brightly for the camera, I found something very sad about her eyes in that picture, as she sat alone in the large wicker armchair. As that photo was taken, another camera was snapping what would become an equally famous image. that of Amber Fry and Scott in formal attire at an event 96 miles away. Mm, mm, mm. Zimmett didn't meet Scott until the day Lacey went missing. And when Scott phoned Stacy a second time that afternoon, the retired policeman remembered he was weeping hysterically. Yet, when they arrived at the Petersons a short time later, Zimmett was surprised to see no sign that Scott had been crying. His eyes were not red or watery, nor did his face appear flushed. Zimmett also got the impression that Scott was avoiding him, possibly because of his status as a former cop. Zimmett expressed uneasiness about Scott, but he was sure Lacey's family would stand by their son-in-law in the absence of any clear proof that he was involved. The search of the Peterson home was in full swing when Detective Al Brocchini arrived there at 11 o'clock on the morning of December 27th. Officers in protective hairnets, booties, and latex gloves were combing each room, looking for blood or other trace evidence that might suggest a struggle. Crime scene manager Rudy Sculte, these last names, boy, Scoltetti, had instructed investigators to check baseboards, crevices, and lower portions of all furniture, since there was a possibility that the house could have been cleaned. Upon entering the house, Brocchini gave detectives the 2-day fishing license Scott handed over the previous evening. The issue date, 12/20/2002, was written in red ink. The license had the numeral 2, indicating it was valid for 2 days. The effective dates, December 23rd and 24th, were obviously filled in at a later time. Detectives recorded the license into the crime scene evidence log along with the dozen other items they had seized. Brocchini was anxious to locate the clothing that Scott had worn during his fishing trip. In the laundry area, he spied a green long-sleeve shirt folded on top of a laundry basket. He recognized the article as the same green pullover he had seen in the washing machine on Christmas Eve. Underneath the shirt was the blue t-shirt he had observed, but the pair of blue jeans Scott had worn were not there. Brocchini asked his team if they come across a pair of men's denim jeans. One officer said he found a pair in the washing machine. The pants were dry, as if they had not yet gone through the wash cycle. Brocchini asked that they be processed as evidence. Moving to the guest bedroom where Scott kept his clothes, Brocchini checked the inside of the armoire. He found a second pair of jeans folded on top of several articles of clean clothing. The location suggested that this might be the pair Scott had just laundered. A closer inspection revealed suspicious stains on the front portion of the leg, and Brocchini also seized them as evidence. He next looked for the tan camouflage jacket that he had seen in Scott's truck on Christmas Eve, but he could find neither the camouflage jacket nor the fishing lures. He did, however, locate the umbrellas that were wrapped in the tarp on the back of the truck. They were now in Scott's backyard, leaning against the fence at the far end of the property. 3 large umbrella stands were nearby. Brocchini wondered why Scott would load up the umbrellas in his truck, but not the stands. The blue tarp that had been wrapped around the umbrellas was now in the patio shed, spread out beneath a power sprayer. In a second, smaller shed on the south side of the residence, Brocchini found the tan canvas tarp among the garden tools. It seemed odd that Scott would risk damaging what looked like a valuable new boat cover by leaving a power tool on top of it. Sure enough, fuel had leaked onto the cover, and a strong gasoline odor permeated the air. Brocchini knew that Scott had admitted making at least one additional trip to his workshop since Christmas Eve. If he had planned on placing the umbrellas in his workshop on December 24th, why did he change his mind on 12/26? Brocchini wrote. It's also unusual that this brand new boat tarp that was in the back of Scott's truck on 12/24 was now placed in a shed under a leaking gas motor. This appeared completely out of character since most of Scott's things are in very good condition and well cared for. And when the canine units arrived, one possible motive for this careless behavior became apparent: the destruction of forensic evidence. The dogs searched the premises, including the front and back yards, the patio, and the large storage shed, and the crawl space below the house. But this produced no new leads. The smallest shed where the boat cover was stored could not be searched. The interior of the shed reeked of gasoline even after the tarp had been removed. Detective Rick House recorded. The dog handler told House that absent a significant body part, the source of the odor would have to be removed and the shed would need to sit open for at least 2 days before the cadaver dog, Twist, would be effective in a search. Mm. Inside the residence, officers were confiscating items listed in the search warrant. A dirt devil vacuum cleaner was taken from the hallway closet. And an upright vacuum was carefully wrapped to prevent any debris from escaping undetected. In the master bedroom, sparsely decorated with wood and wicker, officers noticed several jewelry boxes atop the couple's six-drawer dresser. They contained pieces of jewelry that matched items Scott said his wife was wearing at the time she disappeared, including 2 gold chains with clear stones, 1 gold watch with numerous clear stones on the face, and a white metal ring with blue and clear stones. All of these items were seized as well. In a dresser drawer, investigators found 5 jewelry appraisals in the name of Robert Rocha, along with passports for Scott and Lacey and her diary. The first entry was made July 16, 2002, the last on December 1st, 2002. What appeared to be a ripped-up credit report from Experian was also cataloged. Mosquito netting dangled from the ceiling above the Petersons' queen-size bed. The fine, loosely knotted mesh was obviously more decorative than functional. A crime scene officer photographed the bed, capturing the chilling indentation in the duvet cover Bocchini had observed that first night. Pulling the feathery white comforter from the couple's bed, the detectives observed 2 small spots that might be blood. They collected samples that marked the cover as evidence. Police also observed the wooden canvas hamper next to the dresser, but did not collect any of the dirty clothes it contained. The double closet was filled with women's clothes. Hanging in the left corner were 2 shoe trees. Detectives had been advised that Lacey would have worn white tennis shoes when walking the dog. A pair of ladies' Ralph Lauren slip-on tennis shoes was in the closet. They were marked as evidence. The guest bedroom closet was full of Scott's clothes and his gum collection. 6 rifles were removed from the closet, along with the 3 ammo magazines and a number of 12-gauge shotgun shells. Investigators confiscated a second credit report from this trash, a Travelodge envelope containing handwritten letters from the nightstand and a notebook from atop the desk. The couple's marriage license, mortgage files, and checkbooks were removed from the file cabinet, as was an insurance binder dated 6/25/01. The officers seized 2 laptop computers, a Dell and a Compaq. A second Dell PC and an IBM ThinkPad laptop had already been collected from Scott's warehouse. Computer forensic investigator Kirk Stockham would later identify the sites visited by both Scott and Lacey and the different email accounts they used. He would find that the 2 had visited a variety of websites, including eBay, remodeling sites, and new baby research. The other 3 computers were apparently used by Scott exclusively. exclusively. They contain Scott's pornography bookmarks, including bestiality and bondage themed websites. Some of the titles were so prejudicial that they would never have been admitted at trial, including Raping the Teacher and The Wife Confesses. Given that Lacey had worked as a teacher, the first title is especially chilling. Okay, so I don't have a problem with anybody looking at porn. People can look at porn, doesn't make you a bad person. But when it includes animals, you know, and rape, I start, giving folks a side eye when they into that kind of stuff. The forensic search of Scott's computers would also reveal two websites Scott had visited on December 8, 2002. Stockton was able to retrieve a map that Peterson had called up depicting a topical map of the currents and depths of San Francisco Bay around Brooks Island. Peterson said that after he launched his 14-foot aluminum boat with a 15-horse motor, he drove north out of the marina roughly 2 miles. Brokina later wrote, Peterson claimed he could see Brooks Island from his boat. Peterson described Brooks Island as having a lot of debris and trash around it, with a large sign indicating no landings. Peterson said he was in the water between 45 minutes and an hour. The area Peterson described going to in his boat was the same area that Peterson had brought up on his computer on 12/8/2002. Investigators moved to the bright blue nursery, pausing momentarily over the tiny infant clothing laid out inside the crib, most with the price tag still attached. A white bag in a corner of the small room was full of women's clothes. Some of the items appeared to be new. Others looked like they were marked for the dry cleaner. 2 pairs of stretch maternity pants were collected as evidence, as was a sonogram picture, presumably of their son Connor. 4 hairbrushes were collected from the bathroom, along with 2 Oral-B toothbrush heads. In the dining room, a photographer's flash illuminated the presents that lay wrapped beneath the Petersons' Christmas tree. The Louis Vuitton wallet, nestled in a fancy brown gift bag, was the only gift taken for examination by crime lab personnel. On top of the polished dining table, police found a Louis Vuitton purse containing a wallet and identification in the name of Lacey Peterson. Officers collected the pocketbook as evidence. In the bright yellow kitchen, the message light on the answering machine was flashing. The officers listened to 2 new messages and 11 saved ones. One of the detectives used a cassette player to preserve them. Once the messages were copied, the machine was unplugged and taken as evidence. Handwritten notes and jewelry receipts found on the counter were also seized, along with a wall calendar and a yoga schedule pinned to the refrigerator. The popular book for soon-to-be mothers, What to Expect When You're Expecting, was on the coffee table in the family room. Crime scene officer Doug Lovell vacuumed around the coffee tables with special debris collecting equipment. The FBI forensic search team, man, they went through that place with a fine-tooth comb, didn't they? Good grief. The FBI forensic search team examined the Petersons' family room and the area near the washing machine for trace evidence. The investigators observed a small brownish colored stain believed to be a blood transfer on the interior French door leading to the rear yard, and a brownish colored spatter on the lower half of the water heater door. 2 stains were found inside the door jamb. A presumptive test on 2 of the spots tested negative for the presence of blood, but police elected to collect all the samples anyway. Squares of all the carpets were also clipped. Just outside the rear door was a built-in sink. There, police found Mackenzie's brown leash, 2 pairs of shoes, Timberland tennis shoes on the back porch, and Donna work boots from the front porch were tagged. Man, they cut up carpet. I would have a fit if my place became a crime scene and Jesus. They's cutting up my carpet and, oh man. At 4:15 p.m., Detective Brocchini joined detectives at Scott's warehouse office. The overhead fluorescent lights illuminating the office space grabbed the detective's attention. On 12/24/02 at 2300 hours, when I was at the business with Scott Peterson, Peterson told me there was no electricity and I would have to use my flashlight or headlights to see inside, Brocchini wrote in his report. Detective Henry Dodge Handy showed me two light switches, one inside the office and one inside the warehouse, that turned on the fluorescent lights overhead, making the whole inside of this business well lit. To Brocchini, it was another sign of Scott's bad faith. I found it highly suspicious that Scott would not want me to have the lights on in the business when I was there inspecting his boat. The warehouse contained three distinct sections. The first was the office area with a cluttered desk, two computers, a fax, and a phone. The second area was a large open warehouse space containing a large flat trailer, Scott's 14-foot Sears fishing boat on its own trailer, a forklift, and numerous wooden pallets stacked high with a fertilizer product in plastic jars. It was impossible to get to the small bathroom in the rear of the business without climbing over pallets. Brocchini observed fresh, dry, ready-mixed concrete on the flatbed trailer. A 1-gallon pitcher containing water and a mallet was nearby. More was on the floor in front of the trailer. Checking inside the 14-foot aluminum boat, the investigator found the tan camouflage jacket he had seen in Scott's truck on Christmas Eve. The jacket was now stuffed inside a green duffel in the bow of the boat, along with long lengths of nylon line and the two new fishing lures that he had seen on December 24th. The shotgun shells from the truck's toolbox were also inside the bag. He found the missing Big 5 bag and the sales receipt for the fishing tackle in a missing or in a trash pail. It was clear Scott had been there after the taped interview the previous night. Brocchini wondered what else he might have done during his return trip. He was surprised he had not cleaned up the cement debris before police blocked access to the warehouse. Examining the flatbed trailer in more detail, he noticed what appeared to be 4 distinctive round impressions on the dry ready mix. The one anchor he found in the boat seemed to match the size of a water pitcher that was on the flatbed. The pitcher was about 1/3 full with murky water and ringed with gray residue, apparently from the ready mix concrete. It appeared adding ready mix to the water made these anchors, Brocchini noted. After the cement mold set, they were removed from the pitcher and set on the flatbed trailer. From the distinct circles on the trailer, it appeared at least 4 anchors were made. We could only find the one anchor that was inside the boat. That anchor had no line attached. It consisted of 2 separate and distinct colors, as if the cement was not properly mixed. The upper portion was gray and seemed consistent with the powder sprinkled around the pitcher. The lower half was white, resembling the mix found inside the shop vacuum in the warehouse. Re-examining the rib line of the boat's interior, he could come up with no reason the cement particles would be there, unless Scott used the cement anchors to weigh Lacey's body down, and cement had crumpled off as she went over the side. Detectives also discovered a pair of yellow needle-nosed pliers beneath the boat's bench seat. Clamped in the pliers was a black hair. A piece of red line was lying on the floor nearby. Detective Hendy The crime scene manager observed that the hair and pliers appeared to be human. Placing the items into sealed bags, he marked them as into evidence to be sent for DNA testing. It's unknown it's unknown whose hair it was, but it was my understanding that Lacey Peterson had black hair, Detective Hendy noted. During the search, Captain Chris Boyer waited outside the building with Deputy Eloise Anderson and the cadaver dog Twist. Brocchini, Brocchini wanted them to examine the interior of the warehouse. Once inside, the animal hit on an area on the south side of the workshop next to the boat. Brocchini watched as the canine made a strong hit on the 3 milk crates that were on the ground against the south wall. One of the crates contained a large roll of shrink wrap. The other 2 held tie-down straps and other assorted items. The dog also had an indication on the bow of the boat, on the bow of the boat, along the starboard or right side. As the officers discussed the dog's reaction, Brocchini saw someone open the garage door and drive his truck inside. He walked over to speak with the man, who identified himself as Ron Prater. Prater had been Scott's neighbor on Emerald Avenue since August 2002. Although he knew Peterson by sight, he did not know his name. Scott kept to himself. In fact, although they worked mere feet away from each other, Prater said the two had never actually acknowledged each other. It was another example of a Scott Peterson many might not recognize. The supposedly congenial, neighborly young man who had never introduced himself to someone he saw on a regular basis. Maybe Prater just didn't have anything Scott wanted or needed. Prater and his boss were both working on the mornings of December 23rd and December 24th. He wasn't certain which day he had seen Scott there, but thought it was either Monday or Tuesday. And when he arrived for work between 8 and 9, Scott's truck was parked facing north in front of his open garage door. Prater observed 3 green and white sacks stacked in the bed of the pickup along the left side. He assumed they were some sort of fertilizer product. The detective asked if the bags could have been ready-mix cement. Prater could only say that the sacks were the right size. Prater also noticed a pair of brown shoes on the open tailgate. Brocchini recalled seeing a pair of brown shoes when he was surveying the shop and went back inside to retrieve them. When Prater identified them as the pair he had seen, Brocchini marked them into evidence. While inside, the detectives also checked the bags, but he found nothing matching Prater's description. The detective was convinced Scott had made the anchors on that very day. They would have set up in plenty of time for the fishing trip the next morning. When asked about Scott's boat, Prater told the detective he had seen it parked but never actually hitched to Scott's pickup. At 5:40 p.m., Detective Grogan called, asking Brocchini to return to the Peterson residence and collect a small sample of what appeared to be fresh concrete on the north side of the driveway. Grogan thought it might be leftover concrete that had washed into the dirt along the driveway. Meanwhile, another detective on the case, George Stow, was following up on a lead from a woman named Diane Jackson, who had reported witnessing the burglary across the street from the Petersons. At 11:40 on December 24th, Jackson was driving along Covina Avenue, and as she passed the Medina residence, she saw 3 short of stature, dark-skinned, but not African-American guys standing in the front yard near a van. As she passed, the men turned and looked at her. 2 of the men were standing at the rear of the vehicle, and the third person was in the front yard. At the time, she thought they were landscapers, but when she noticed them staring as she passed, she changed her mind. And at first, she said the van was white, but then decided it might have been a darker color. Try to remember back as you were driving by and see if you can visualize the van in your mind, the detective told her. It might have been tan or brown, she replied. In any event, she said it was an older model with a door or doors that opened at the rear. She couldn't remember anything else. After the interview with Jackson, Detective Stow phoned the Medinas again, related what Jackson had told them, and asked if that description rang any bells. Mr. Medina said it did not. He asked the detective to speak with his wife. Susan Medina listened intently, then asked if the men were Vietnamese. All I have is short in stature, dark hair, dark skin, but not African American, the detective said. Mrs. Medina recalled a Vietnamese crew that had poured some cement on their home in July, but those workers had a construction truck, she told Stow, not a van. At 7:30 p.m., Scott Peterson phoned Detective Grogan and told him that he was sitting in his pickup outside his home. Members of the press were there interviewing a uniformed police officer. Scott wanted Grogan to stop the cop from speaking to the media and have the journalist leave the neighborhood so he could return home for the night. As long as the members of the press are not on your property, I cannot force them to leave the area, Grogan told him. However, I could have the officer remove the crime scene tape and leave the area. You can possibly return home if the media loses interest and leaves the scene. Scott opted to have the officer removed from the scene. The detectives explained to him that his house was not secured and he would be taking responsibility for it if he returned. Scott agreed. The press is a ravenous animal. It will chase a story until fed. And the meal doesn't always have to be the truth. In fact, if a tale is good enough, complete enough, the media can become satiated and bored, leaving of its own accord. But Scott approached this inevitable part of the search as a guilty man from the inception, and his behavior piqued the press's interest. Although his mantra was, I want the focus to be on Lacey, he never explained persuasively how a husband's pleas and or press appearances could have a negative impact on the search. Meanwhile, Sharon, Ron, Brent, and even his own parents were benefiting the cause with their press conferences. Furthermore, in his private dealings with the police, Scott still didn't seem very curious about the progress of the investigation. Scott's demeanor was courteous throughout our telephone conversation, Rogan noted in a police report several days after Lacey disappeared, but he did not inquire as to the result of the search warrants. As I received this telephone call, Detective Bueller and Detective Brocchini gave me a recording device for my cellular telephone. A portion of our conversation was captured on audio tape. As of 10 p.m., Detective Brocchini contacted Captain Boyer and asked to have the Brooks Island area of the San Francisco Bay searched by cadaver dogs and the marina parking lot searched by tracking dogs. Boyer asked for Lacey's sunglasses and pink slipper to be delivered as scent objects and then scheduled 3 patrol boats, 2 cadaver dogs, 1 dive team, and a helicopter for 9 o'clock the next morning. The police also made available a team of specialized cadaver dogs with the ability to smell bodies in the water. Wow. They are just pulling out every resource that they have, pulling no punches. Members of the Contra Costa County Search and Rescue Team initiated the search an hour early on December 28th. It was a nippy 53 degrees and the air was thick with moisture as the three orange crafts were launched. Police did not limit themselves to Brooks Island, but widened their scope to include 40 miles of shoreline in nearby Richmond. Later that morning, Detective Brocchini called Deputy Chris Boyer and told him that two trailing dogs had searched the parking lot. The first dog from Alameda County Emergency Services was unable to detect any scent in the lot area. The second dog, Trimble, had begun searching at the northeast entrance of the launch area. After turning north, he ran approximately 10 feet, turned and circled several times in the immediate area, then stopped by his handler's side, indicating that she had no scent. Eloise Anderson then moved Trimble closer to the launch area and directed her to check that section of the parking lot. Again, the dog circled, sniffed the nearby foliage, and returned. Trimble was next walked to the northeast entrance of the boat launch area, where she was again given Lacey's items to smell. This time, the dog turned north and trotted about 30 feet. She then turned, circled, headed south towards the launch area with a steady pull on her harness. Anderson later wrote in her report, "She took me to the westernmost point of the pier at the launch area and pulled steadily to a pole pylon where the pier took a sharp right and then a sharp left turn. She went approximately 15 feet past the sharp left turn, turned around and returned to the pylon where she again checked out over the water, turned and stopped, indicating the end of the trail." Deputy Boyer said this is not a conclusive search, Brocchini noted in his report. Yet, in his and the handler's opinion, the dog was reacting to Lacey's scent as it ran through the parking lot and down the right side of the boat ramp. Meanwhile, Detective Grogan had been working at headquarters almost nonstop since Christmas Eve. Although his suspicions about the case were growing, he had no hard evidence or material leads. Then the phone rang. An officer calling to report a strange conversation with a sexual assault counselor, Jill Smith. Smith said she had counseled a confidential victim of a sexual assault about 2 weeks earlier who claimed to have been lured in a brown van, either a Chevy or Ford, by the woman's ex-girlfriend. While in the van, two men and a woman raped the victim, and a satanic ritual was conducted, the officer related. The victim told Smith that the group frequented area parks and was currently living at Woodward Reservoir. Smith stated that during the ritual, the group mentioned a Christmas Day death and that she would read about it in the paper. After news of the brown van broke in the press, the Modesto Police Department found itself racing with Scott's defense team to gain control of the vehicle. A private investigator hired by Mark Garagos was reportedly offering $2,000 for information about the van, and police feared the defense team might get hold of it first and find evidence that Lacey had been inside. Grogan immediately dispatched two officers to the Woodward Reservoir to search for the van. Theories about the brown van and the satanic cult were quickly seized upon by the media, many of whom seemed to have read too many detective novels. Satanic murders have been reported in contemporary America, to be sure. However, almost without exception, they proved to be the work of a single demented individual, not a collective action by some cult or coven. When the Modesto officers ultimately located the brown Chevy van, the human occupants, Rayon Miranda, 33, Sherry Miranda, 36, Mary Renfro, 63, and Donnie Renfro, 55, were carefully interviewed. They had been camping at Woodward for about 3 weeks, they said. One of the four, Rayon Miranda, told officers that he had been in Modesto the previous week when Yosemite Boulevard was blocked off with police vehicles. The officers were given permission to search their trailer, tent, and van, but nothing of significance was found. However, the van was to was also home to 6 resident mice. But when the vehicle was turned over to the DOJ for examination, the rodents escaped into that office for a time. The van was never reclaimed by its owners, and when the MPD and district attorney decided to sell it for scrap, Garagos immediately purchased it. Many reporters thought he must have a real lead that might exonerate Scott, but the van was never produced at trial. Its current location is unknown. In another part of the station house, a call was coming into the Lacey Peterson hotline from Lacey's prenatal yoga instructor, Debbie Wolski. Wolski, part owner of the Village Yoga Center in Modesto's McHenry Village, told the investigator that Lacey had begun classes during her first trimester, but soon quit because she wasn't feeling well. Lacey resumed classes in the second trimester and attended regularly on Wednesdays and Fridays for the next 5 months. On one Wednesday in December, either the 4th or the 11th, Lacey had attended a session wearing about $50,000 worth of diamonds. Wolski described the pieces as a pair of 1-carat solitaire diamond earrings, a single brilliant 3-carat diamond necklace, and a large diamond ring with a 3-carat stone in the center, a diamond stone on either side, and a row of half-carats in a platinum or white gold setting. On her left ring finger, Lacey wore her wedding rings. Asked if the pieces were real, Lacey blushed and said yes, explaining that the diamonds had belonged to her grandmother. Lacey hinted that the rings only fit her because her fingers had swollen during pregnancy. Lacey told Wolski that she was planning to break the ring into smaller pieces, including an engagement ring for her sister. She had worn them to class because she was going to have them appraised afterward, and she didn't want to leave the gems in her car. During the chat, Lacey also mentioned that she was in the process of putting her grandfather in a nursing home, and that the family was going to sell his house and its furnishings. Lacey said the house contained a number of antiques and inquired if Debbie would be interested in purchasing anything. Lacey told her that her exercise consisted of walking her dog every morning. The instructor remembered Lacey describing a day in early December when she was starting to feel dizzy and lightheaded. The feeling was like a hot flash, she said, and she had to turn back early. The last time Wolski had seen Lacey was on December 13th. Scott was very excited about the baby, Lacey had told her. I got the impression that they were happy, Wolski reported. Another friend of Lacey's, Terry Western, spoke with Detective John Bueller that afternoon at the Detective Division on F Street. Western, a 54-year-old real estate agent and mother of Lacey's girlfriend, Stacy Boyers, was the broker who sold the couple their Covina home. She had known the outgoing Lacey since she was a child. She noted that Scott was the quiet one in the couple's relationship, but the couple always appeared to be on their honeymoon. Scott seemed to adore her, Weston said. He would stand up as she entered a room or get up from the table and seemed like a gentleman who was in love with his wife. Weston had last seen Lacey at Stacy's holiday party on December 14th. That night, Lacey told her that Scott could not attend because his boss had flown into San Francisco from Europe unexpectedly, and Scott had to go to the city to meet him. Weston found the story extremely difficult to believe. As a businesswoman herself, she found it implausible that a boss would fly from Europe unexpectedly and require an employee to meet him on such short notice. As the police would soon learn, Weston was right on target.
I remember when you filled my heart with joy. Was I blind to the truth? Just there to feel the space, 'cause now you have no interest in anything that I have to say. I've allowed you to make me feel. I feel so dumb. What kind of fool am I? You so easily set me aside. You made a fool of me. Tell me why. You say that you don't care, but we made love. Tell me why. You made a fool of me. You made a fool of me. I want to kiss you. Does she want you the pain that I do? Smell you in my dreams. Now, when we're face to face, you won't look me in the eye. No time, no friendship, no love. You say don't touch you, I can't touch you no more. Can't touch you anymore. Say that you don't care, you just don't care. Tell me why you made a fool of me. Tell me why I feel like such a fool. You made a fool of me. Tell me why. Tell me why.
Well, that concludes part 2 of A Deadly Game by Catherine CRIER, the untold story of the Scott Peterson investigation. I hope you enjoyed all of it thus far. We will begin part 3 with chapter 5. We are moving on steadily, trying to do 50 pages at a time. I think we said that the book was 434 pages. We will get there. In the meantime, I'll try and find some video clips for you. I'm sure like on some documentaries, they have video clips of actual press conferences. So y'all can see this fool live and in action. But anyway, thank you all for stopping by and spending some time with little old Madam Whip-Ass. But have a great night. Ciao.